Hello, everyone. On behalf of IBM Systems Magazine, I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation. My name is Janine Donnelly. I am the manager of webinars for IBM Systems Magazine, and I will be the moderator for today's event. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You may ask a question at any time during the event by entering it into the Q&A panel. If you experience technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A panel to alert us, and someone will assist you. You may download a PDF version of the slide deck by clicking on the drop-down menu labeled Event Resources on the left of your screen. Please be sure to check that out for other valuable resources. Today you will find a case study as well as an article about keeping your data safe. And you can download those materials right from the event. It will not kick you out of the webinar. Today's webinar, Overcoming Db2 Utility Challenges with Next Generation Technology from BMC, is sponsored by BMC Software. Our featured speakers today are John Barry and Carolyn Henry. John is Principal Product Manager for BMC Software's Db2 solutions. John has nearly 20 years of experience in Db2, focusing on data structures and data management. John has served in roles as Support Manager, Marketing Manager, Pre-Sales, and Product Management. John's traveled all over the world speaking to clients about relevant topics in the mainframe space. Carolyn is the Marketing Manager for Db2 Solutions at BMC. Carolyn has over 15 years of experience in software and mainframe systems. Her experience includes management, sales enablement, marketing with enterprise content management, and data management software, ranging across structured and unstructured data. With our introductions complete, Carolyn, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks so much, Janine. It's a pleasure to be here. So today we wanted to talk with everyone about challenges in the Db2 space and different ways you might overcome them with new approaches and new technology. So to start out with, I want to acknowledge that digital business has us pretty much surrounded nowadays, right? So the sheer amount of mobile transactions folks create every hour of every day is creating this massive onslaught of data. I know I kicked off 4 or 5 transactions this morning. I did some banking. I checked a balance or 2. I'm kind of compulsive about that. I have to say I'm guilty. And I purchased some things for the household on Amazon. So that's just one person before even getting out of bed in the morning. And performance is key for each and every one of those transactions. I get really testy, and I'm sure you do too, if there's even a little bit of a delay, right? So mobile workloads are driving this unprecedented growth in the number of transactions that IT needs to handle, and that demand will only increase. So let's talk for a few minutes about specifically what that means to us in mainframe IT. So John, I want to bring you in here to tell us what you see going on when you're visiting clients.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. So, yeah, this digital business is a major reality for us in mainframe. What we're seeing is this flood of data. It's bringing massive amounts of new data into DB2 specifically. You have now very unpredictable transactions. It used to be, pretty simple. No, I hate to say simple managing a DB2 system, but we knew when our peaks were going to be. We knew that in the mornings, customers would call in, they would check their balances, they'd do things like that. Then at lunchtime, everything would quiet down. It'd pick back up in the afternoon, and the weekends were relatively quiet. Nowadays, it's constant. In fact, I've talked to banks who have said that now their busiest day is Sunday afternoon with people checking their balance for the week. And one of the things you mentioned there, you checked your balance, I just mentioned that. A lot of these don't generate any revenue for the company. So now you're doing even more transactions and getting no extra money, which means obviously cost per transaction is going down. So you're hit with trying to increase performance while managing costs, and we hear this all the time. At the same time, it's making DB2 a whole lot more complex. We have new data types. I think we'll talk about those a little bit later. Individual objects are getting massive. We also are coming up on that time where those seasoned DB2 veterans who have been working it for 30 years are now saying, yeah, I'm ready to retire, and I'm actually stepping away. And so you have this new generation of staff coming in who are not experts in it. And then we've got this perfect storm that at the same time, customers like you, Carolyn, are saying, I don't want my balance in 10 minutes. I want my balance in 3 seconds. And if I don't get it, I'll use my phone to switch banks. I'll use my phone to switch insurance. I want things right now. And so it's this perfect storm. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news for everyone on the call here. What you're dealing with today is the best it's ever going to be, because every day it's going to get more and more challenging.
So some of you might feel like we're really treading water a bit, right? And we're just barely keeping up or kind of sinking beneath that surface. But what we really need to do as businesses is to be moving forward and moving ahead. So, we need to think about things differently from how we've always done them and come up with new ways to cope and get from that kind of I'm just surviving to thriving to move ahead. So we might think that this is a capacity problem, maybe, but what we really have is a DB2 data management problem. And we have to tackle the big DB2 problems created by this onslaught of data head on. So here are 4 that we see kind of bogging down our clients. And John, do you want to talk through some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these are, what I just talked about there. The amount of data is growing incredibly. You have, at the same time, you need to keep your data available all the time or your customers will choose someone else. Customers demand in instantaneous response times from your data, and they don't care about the fact that you're now managing terabytes or petabytes worth of data. And you're told to do all this while your management is telling you, and we need to decrease the budget. No one's just having money poured at them. So all these things are happening all at the same time, but they're different degrees at different places.
Definitely. So we wanted to check in with you guys on the line, right? So which are weighing heaviest on you? We've got an interactive poll here. Hopefully it'll perk everybody up from their coffees and participate with us to do this quick little poll to see what the biggest challenges confronting you are. Janine, could you help us open up the poll?
Great. Thanks, Carolyn. I have sent the poll out to the audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're looking for is your input to this question. What's your biggest DB2 utility problem? So go ahead and select the answer that best matches your situation, hit submit, and we will be sharing those results with you. And if you happen to join late, I just want to direct your attention again to that Event Resources tab, because you can download a PDF version of the slide deck, and there's also some other valuable resources there related to today's topic that you might be interested in. So check that out. And results are coming in, and actually just want to give it a couple more seconds to compile. So I will let you know that following the webinar, most likely tomorrow, we'll be sending out a follow-up email. It will have a link to today's recorded webinar so that you can revisit it at any time on demand. And it looks like there we go, Carolyn. I think we have a quorum here. I'm going to go ahead and send these results out to the audience.
Great. Thanks so much, Janine.
That's pretty interesting, Carolyn. So I guess what I'm seeing here is it's actually pretty even here, which is I could kind of see that coming, because really, like I mentioned, a lot of these are interrelated. And what we will do is we'll go through them one by one, but achieving 24/7 availability is leading our poll right now, with keeping costs. That's interesting. So this is what we see from a lot of places. This is a very interesting result. And you're right. So what we need to talk about is how you mentioned that moving forward. How do you not just keep treading water? There's a way to actually manage all of these at the same time, achieve top performance, give your customers a great view of their data instantaneously while maintaining cost, providing full availability, no matter how complex your system gets.
Great. Yeah, John. So, if it really is a data management problem and we need to transform and address these challenges in a different way. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of those newer modern solutions that approach things differently?
Yeah. So the reason we say that it's a data management problem, and I don't think enough people look at it that way, what's gone on in DB2 for decades now is it's constantly gotten bigger and bigger. It didn't happen overnight. It sometimes feels like that, but data is growing, customer demands are growing, and so what we do is we upgrade hardware, we upgrade our storage, we reduce the amount of times we do data management because it impacts our customers negatively in a lot of cases. The data gets too big and we just can't manage it. Our windows are shrinking. So all this happens and we start thinking, I've got a DB2 problem, I've got a capacity problem, I need more, and now I've got this competing budget problem. But when you look at it from, like we just said, it's a data management problem. If you can fix your data management issues and stop building your processes around limitations in the tools you're given, you can change the way you do business to focus on the customer. And to do that, you've got to have a modern solution. The issue is the utilities that you've been using are based on what DB2 looked like back in 1985. That was when those utilities were designed. They were designed for, millions of rows of data. They were designed for low transaction rates, and then they've been improved little by little, but at the same time, the data has been growing exponentially. What we can talk about today is a solution architected for digital business. That's a major point, a different architecture that can do things differently, giving you true advanced automation. And when we say automation, we'll explain the differences there. Verifying data integrity, I think that's something that not enough people talk about. When I give presentations, I'll ask them, what's the number one tool you use to go verify data integrity? And I usually get laughed at that we don't do that. We don't have time for that. We're trying, like you said, we're trying just to stay afloat at this point. I heard that asked in one conversation, and one of our architects gave a presentation. He asked that same question, and someone jokingly said, we wait for the telephone to ring. The telephone's our best tool. And everyone kind of laughed, and then it died down that, hey, you're right, we don't verify data integrity. We wait for applications to break. Well, that doesn't work today. You've got to have tools that do that for you automatically. And at the same time, your data cannot be down. So what we can show you today is this, what we call a new paradigm in data management, a new way of, a new architecture that can lift all those limitations you've had that you've been working around and make your life actually easier while running your business better.
Okay, well, awesome. So, John, let's take each one of these one by one, each one of these challenges.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Let's talk about the overwhelming waves of data first. So, this graph from IDC really shows it well. The data that we have is growing, 50-fold over the last decade, and we're almost there, right? We're almost at 2020. So, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about deep dive into the data problem.
Okay, yeah, so, we've been talking about something like this, and IDC did this report a while back, and now you're right, we're getting close to that 2020. This has been a scary chart since the beginning and is even scarier now when we look where we are. Not everybody is faced with 40 petabytes of data, or 40,000, whatever it is. Not everyone is in the same place on this curve. The point is, it's an upward trending curve, and everybody is somewhere on it. I've got the pleasure of being able to do presentations with Craig Mullins, who most people on this call will know as one of the leaders in DB2, and he's got a great joke he tells that's real life, that he has never been called into an account as a consultant to solve the problem of shrinking data. He said, no one ever calls me and says, my data is getting smaller every single year. What do I do? We all know that. Every year we're dealing with more data. And I've seen different charts that show that, the amount of data per full-time DBA is growing by 8 times in the next 2 years, things like that. These are scary thoughts. And why? Why does that even matter? Why do I care how big my data is getting? I mean, am I just worried about, well, I need to buy more storage? No, the issue is when you look on the right hand, the most important responsibilities for DBAs. DBAs are charged with maintaining their database and improving performance. And what happens is because this data is so big and we're just trying to get our maintenance done, trying to get reorgs, trying to get backups, hopefully running checks every now and then, trying to get any of that stuff done, that we lose focus on the fact that that maintenance is done for performance. And we've got a quote here from IBM, data that is physically well organized will improve your performance, especially indexes. And that's something that people forget. Indexes are getting ridiculously large. And so what happens is I can't reorganize them. So maybe I just won't have indexes. That's a decision that I've seen people make where they've decided trying to get a reorg done with an index is so hard, I'm just not going to have an index, and therefore my applications are going to run slower, and now I've got a performance problem. It all goes back to that data management. Again, if you can solve this data flood issue, then you can solve your performance problems.
Right, and John, you touched on some of the problems that it's eroding business efficiency, but we can also talk about, the day-to-day life of the DBA and what folks go through, right? So I'm going to flip to this next slide that shows some of the unworkable workarounds that maybe you guys will recognize.
Yeah, Carol, that's a great point. So what happens is as you start putting off maintenance, you start doing all those kind of things, then you're right, it hits your business, your application times are down, you're not going as well, you're straining. We always talk about you're in response, you're fighting fires all the time, but DBAs are not sitting still. I am always so impressed when I go talk to DBAs about, given the tools they're given and the limitations they're given with those, how they keep things, they do stay afloat. And they do this through what we call workarounds. If I go talk to someone and say, you got a data management problem, the first thing I get is, no, I'm not. I get my reorgs done. I get my copies done. I'm fine. Everything's fine. And it's because what they've done is they found a way to cope. We call these workarounds, but we call them unworkable workarounds because they cause other problems. So these are some of the ones on the screen that I see all the time. I'm trying to make my procedures that I put in place 15 years ago work today. I'll ask people all the time, let's stick with reorg. Why do you run your reorgs on Saturday, every Saturday? Well, someone from IBM told me to do it back in 1995, and so we've just done it that way. Well, what about today? Your system doesn't even look like it did then. I hate the ignoring problems, but yeah, that's also it. Yeah, you know what? We can't do certain things, and we just have to live with it. That's the way of the world. Skipping reorgs, we see that all the time. This object's too big, we just don't reorg it. Or, we put those reorgs off. And again, then you're faced with, well, now I've got application problems. And I don't know why I've got these application problems, but I know I just don't do my reorgs. We're constantly reactive. We throw hardware at the problem. We throw storage at the problem. And what this all does is it causes those issues we saw before. Our costs are going up. Our management is so mad that the mainframe costs too much. Well, because I'm not dealing with what I've got. And the one I want to point out again is that avoiding indexes. I see that all the time, and no one gets that link when they say, well, yeah, we limit the number of non-partitioning indexes. We limit the number, whatever kind of index, because it slows down our maintenance. Then we talk to them and say, well, if you had that index, your application would run X% faster. It's like, yeah, but I can't do it because of reorg. So now you're limiting your customers because of limitations in the utilities. And there's a lot of other ways of doing this. One thing we see, Carolyn, is where they'll break up objects. So, well, I've got a huge object, so I'll only do a little bit at a time. That's another big issue that people have.
Yeah, those are great, John. So, we chuckled a little bit putting this together, but speaking of the reorg, some of you might feel like this, might agree that this is what your reorg strategy feels like, right? Once you start your reorg and it completes, you got to go back to the beginning and start all over again, like painting the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, so this is kind of what I just said there, that we talk to people, so I've got a 400-part table space. It's got 6 terabytes of data in it. So I was, how are you managing that? Oh, we manage it just fine. We reorganize 3 parts a day. We manage 4 parts a week, whatever it is. And I was like, so when are you done? I was like, well, at the end, we got to start over because the first ones need to be reorged again, too. So you're right. It's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge, and the point is that bridge is never painted. As soon as you're done, you go back and start over. And that's what really causes that that gap between the maintenance and the performance, because we don't see great performance improvements after a reorg because you didn't actually ever get a reorg done. And it's because they simply can't cope with what they're dealing with.
Right. So there's got to be a better way here. And can you talk to us about how we're tackling that reality a little bit differently?
Absolutely. The answer has got to be in new architecture. And that's what we have. What we did was we designed these products with where Db2 is today and is going tomorrow, as opposed to what it looked like back in 1985. Just some quick highlights. I'm not going to get crazy technical on this. I'd love to do that. When anyone wants to follow up, I'd love to do that. But just some kind of highlights of this architecture are rethinking the way you run utility, rethinking the way utilities work internally. If we look at a reorg, for example, it unloads, it sorts, it reloads. Don't forget, it's got to do decompression in there as well. It's got to read the Db2 log. We can get rid of all that. By not having to sort the data, we can put the data in perfect clustering order without ever decompressing it, without ever unloading it, without ever loading it or sorting it. And so that now when I tell you that we can run in, 1/6 of the time, or we can run 70% faster, it's like, well, yeah, you're not doing any of those things that the other ones are forced to do. When I tell you we can manage billion-row table spaces, well, yeah, I don't have to unload them or decompress them or sort them. That saves me a ton. By changing your processes, you start lifting all these limitations. Also, you've got a mainframe that is the best computer ever made here. You also got it broken up into a sysplex. But when you run utilities, they still run, without getting too complicated, they still run in their little address space. And as things get bigger, the task goes on you. Well, how do you break that object up? How do you run it in different jobs? Why not run a single job that then breaks out into what we call servers and can spawn address spaces on multiple nodes of the sysplex and get that work done across your entire mainframe? So now, if you're dealing with 4,000 partitions, you're dealing with multiple non-partitioning indexes, they can all be done in parallel from a single job. When you don't have to decompress or recompress, you don't need all that extra storage. You can eliminate a lot of your DASD. Also, you've got different kind of data structures as well. You've now got universal table spaces, PBGs. You got LOBs. We'll talk about those. These things all are different structures. They can't be handled the same way. Well, if the utility knows about them and was architected for them, then it can run parallelism different ways. And instead, a PBG, for example, is, even though it's a partition by growth, in reality what it is one giant data set. And so utilities have a problem with them where they have to read the whole thing sequentially. Well, not what we call NGT, next generation technology. It can actually parallel process inside a partition by growth table space, so you get this performance that you haven't seen before. What this allows you to do is get things done that you never could before and really reduce your cost and be ready for digital business.
So that sounds really great, John, but let me ask, are you adding complexity to a process that folks really just have down and that they're familiar with?
That's a great question, and I do get that question a lot. Oh my gosh, yeah, I just mentioned servers, I mentioned parallelism, multitasking, all these different things. I barely have time to get the jobs I already have done. Don't forget, I set these jobs up 15 years ago. Now you want me to change all this. It's going to be so much harder to do. It's not, because one of the beauties of it is we need to simplify. The only way you can manage this complex world you're living in is by simplification. If you look on the screen right now, what you see is the entire JCL required to run a reorg of an entire database. That's it. And we've got a couple keywords on there, RTS, aux. If there's lobs, those things are managed the way they're supposed to be. This thing is completely, there's automation built into this completely where only objects that need to be done will be done. We'll talk about true automation, but that's it. If I asked you now to come up and, can you please submit, someone on the question and answer, feel free to submit all the JCL you have to do just to reorganize an entire database. It's ridiculous. It's hundreds of steps. It can be thousands of jobs even. This is it. It just makes it so simple. It never changes. No JCL is ever generated. And like I said, it manages any kind of data structures you've got out there.
Okay, well, in theory, that sounds awesome, John, but let's talk about a practical example of what this really means.
Okay, yeah, and this is why I get so excited. I've been called all kinds of names, dork, nerd, whatever you want to call it, because I get so passionate and excited about talking about utility. Who gets excited talking about utilities? It's data management. Who gets that excited about it? Well, I do, because when we install this stuff, we see how it changes companies. It's incredible to see, and here's a great example. We actually had a major credit card company do a presentation at iDoug where they wanted to tell their story about how they used our next generation technology and what it did for them. So before the presentation, I was talking with her, and she went through and she said, well, one of the stories we had a 366 part table space. We thought it was fine. We reorganized it 3 to 4 parts weekly. Now we're back to that Golden Gate Bridge, but she said it seemed fine. We just did it and we checked the box. The issue was that we changed the data set size, and all of a sudden we had to reorganize all 4 terabytes in a single job, and we had no way of doing it. So what's our solution? Let's go back to those unworkable workarounds. The solution is buy more hardware. And so what IBM's answer was, if you buy 6 more terabytes of hardware, of DASD, we possibly will be able to complete this reorg in 3.5 days. I think about that. There's 3.5 days of just letting this thing churn and churn and churn, and not to mention you just spent all that money on new DASD just to get a reorg done. So what was their answer? They used NGT. They did the entire reorg with less DASD than they already had on the floor. They saved DASD, and the entire reorg finished in 5 hours and had no downtime. Now, I got all excited about this, and I said, wow, we've got to put benchmarks together. I'm not sure how I'm going to show 3.5 days versus 5 hours, but we've got to put benchmarks together and show everybody. And she stopped me and she said, that has nothing to do with it. I love the fact that y'all finished in 5 hours, but the point was you did it. You finally got our job done. We could not do our job without it. You enabled us to get our job done. That's what's so important. And that's kind of when it hit me that, yeah, our performance is fun. It's great to show. But more importantly, get rid of those workarounds and finally get your job done.
Right. Get to end of job. Okay. So, not only are we talking about this huge data onslaught, right, this huge data problem, but it's new types of data as well. So it's not traditional structured data like voice recordings and data like voice recordings and images and pictures for claims, et cetera. That's all flooding the database now too. So that data doesn't fit neatly into rows and columns. And what kinds of problems does that present?
Yeah, so this is a major issue, and it's been around for a while. We call them, we store unstructured data, which again, Craig Mullins says is a terrible name because every data has structure, but like you said, it doesn't fit into columns and rows. We store it in containers called lobs. Lobs will have, we always talk about them having pictures and images, but really what they end up having is large documents, emails, voice recordings. Anything that doesn't fit into rows can fit into here. They're usually kept for compliance and legal reasons, which makes this data ridiculously important to our business. But the issue is it's stored for long periods of time and almost never accessed. So I've actually talked about these as a write-only table space. We've heard of read-only. This is write-only. You dump the data in there and you hope that legal never asks for it again. The problem is this brings up major issues with data loss, and you can really be at danger when you're dealing with lobs, and we've seen people lose data because of lobs. The main thing about them is lobs are why. So why do you lose data? Because lobs are a different animal. They're not the same thing as structured data. I love that call out there. You may not even know you have them. I talk to a company and I say, we've got a solution for your lobs, and we don't use lobs. Well, we might use lobs because we put some XML, we dump XML in it. Then we did some research with them, and oh yeah, our most critical application is storing all of our claims processing inside those lobs, and we've got over 6,000 of them. And if we lose any of them, we'd be losing millions of dollars. So, whoops, they're critical. They're growing extremely fast. CRMs are using them, Pegasystems, SAP, PeopleSoft. They love to create lobs without DBAs even knowing they're there. And then DBAs are not familiar with what proper lob management means. If I go talk to 10 DBAs, I'm guessing maybe 2 may be able to tell me what they're supposed to be doing with lobs. You're actually supposed to be running check index, running check running check data, and running check lob very regularly before you ever do a reorg of those lobs, because lobs have pointers, and with pointers we go back to our IMS days and pointer checker and things like that, where when you got pointers, you've got problems. Then on top of that, I barely have time to get a reorg done. Don't forget, at iDoug last year, someone posed the question to the IBM roundtable of, I've got a 3 million row lob. I think 3 million rows, that's a joke. I've got a 3 million row lob, and it takes 11 hours to reorg. What am I doing wrong? And IBM's response was, you're not doing anything wrong. They just take a long time. Well, great. And now I'm supposed to also do all these checks on top of it. I just can't get it done.
So, John, we really shouldn't be treading water like that example, or like sinking underneath this process, right? In an ideal world, this should be done automatically and handled for people.
It has to be. And that's the thing. We can actually make this problem go away. That as part of our reorg through a product we call LobMaster, but without running a separate process. You run your reorgs. You saw the JCL that has aux on it. As part of our reorg, we will be doing the check index, check data, and check lob, while also processing the lob differently, doing it in parallel at the data set level. So we had a customer that uses LobMaster, one of the biggest shops in the world, had a lob that they could not get a reorg done. Every 6 hours, this lob would just fail. They couldn't get the reorg done for the space they needed. They now run LobMaster, and it takes 45 minutes, and it does all those checks. You don't have to change your operations at all, and you are completely taken care of with this new structured data. So we're back to completely simplifying your world.
Nice. Okay, but to transition, keep this moving, we need to address the 24/7 demand for availability too. So, John, let's jump into that area.
Yeah, so, we talk about the unworkable workarounds. We did a survey with Forrester and asked DBAs around the world, how are you managing that growing amount of data you and I just talked about? 70% responded, we're scheduling more downtime. Well, don't forget, companies are out there telling their customers, your data is always available. So now you're at odds with what your company is doing, and to manage those problems, your unworkable workaround is more downtime.
Yeah, so that's exactly counter to what the business needs and is asking for, right?
It is, and it's expensive. We got numbers here from Gartner that the average cost is $6,000 per minute. If you're in finance or insurance, it can be a whole lot higher than that. And most companies have between 30 minutes and 6 hours per month. And when you start doing those kind of calculations, think about that, 6 hours times 60 times 6,000. You're spending a lot of money, or you're just losing a lot of money, and now you wonder why your boss is bothering you about our budget. We're not hitting our budget. We're not hitting our budget. Well, here it is. You're just leaking money.
Right. So when folks are talking about the rising costs of business on the mainframe, here's where they could get some, big gains right away.
Real big gains. And at the same time, people have been talking about online reorgs since 1996, 1997. But then in our survey today, you go back to the fact that availability is still my number one problem. Well, why is that? Well, because most online reorgs do not give you full availability. They give you better availability. And even IBM in presentations will suggest you still run online reorgs in a batch window. I don't know many people that still have batch windows. Our NGT, go ahead.
Sorry, John, we really need to get to that plan where you get the maintenance done and handled with less downtime or even zero downtime, right?
It's zero down. That's right. It has to be zero. And so you think about that. If you can eliminate your downtime, think about what that would be. Why do you run reorgs on a weekend? Well, because I need the downtime. Well, if you didn't, what would that change for you? All those workarounds are gone. And with NGT, we give you that. The objects never leave read-write for even a fraction of a second during the utility. Customers cannot get 904s. I've seen some of the biggest shops, most dynamic shops in the world go from thousands of transaction timeouts during a utility down to zero. And because of NGT's ability to manage bigger objects, they're reorganizing 6 times as much data as they did before and now getting no timeouts. We have customers calling that are amazed about the fact that my application didn't even know I was there. That's the point. We have a patented design that never reads the Db2 log. We know what transactions are happening real time. We can manage millions of transactions during a utility. I know of customers that have 13 billion row reorgs with 7 million transactions going on during a utility. We don't require extra products like flash copy or all those setup you have to do. Just run the utility, and so you can do online reorg, check, unload, even online loads, obviously. So you got all these different capabilities of giving you full availability. And then the important thing is, what does that look like to a customer?
Right. So we have a large U.S. financial services company that had some really transformational success with their availability. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah, this is an exciting one. So we have, again, a large company, finance, so downtime is very precious to them. Their customers demand full availability. They told us that they ran their utilities very well. They said, we have a great run shop, and they've got DBAs. They've got a lot of DBAs. They had to put a lot of manpower into this. And they said, we hit about 97.5% availability, which in reality is very good. You'll hear people say 99.9, but what they mean is, well, except for the stuff I schedule. They meant total. Complete total scheduled, complete downtime was 97.5. Now, with NGT, they have 99.9. In fact, they said they do not allow more than 52 minutes for the entire year in their entire system of full scheduled downtime. They have had 100% availability for the last 8 years through NGT. And they said the amount of money this has saved them is incredible.
Nice. So we really need to talk about performance too. Everyone's very focused on getting the best possible performance out of Db2, and we know that that's critical.
It absolutely is. And it goes back, we're kind of building on ourselves here because we've talked about a little bit about it that, you know, all those workarounds you've got, and you're not seeing really the performance improvements by running utilities, which is why we disconnect the two things. We just think, well, I've got to check the box on doing my maintenance. Oh, and I've got performance issues. So for performance, I've got to look at, you know, doing SQL tuning and those kind of things. No, you got to fix your data management first. Remember what we mean. By performance, I'm not talking about performance of utilities. We'll actually show you some performance of utilities. I'm talking about your Db2 itself. Slower response time, slower transaction rate. The issue is, so if you look here, what we've got is typical response time chart. Your baseline peak performance is very good in Db2. It's the best transactional database, so that's why we use it. But then data gets unclustered, it gets disorganized, indexes get disorganized, and performance starts slowly degrading, or not slowly. Sometimes it's very, very rapid. Then hopefully on the weekends, maybe quarterly, depending on the size of the object, maybe yearly, whatever you can do, you finally run a reorg and you're back down to your base performance, and then things degrade again, and then you run a reorg and you degrade again, you run a reorg. This is our life. The issue is all of those peaks equal slower performance, which also means increased costs that we'll talk about in a second. But if we can eliminate all of those peaks and you're now running at peak performance all the time, you eliminate all those mountains there and get down to your baseline performance. Now all of a sudden DB2 is running perfectly and optimized, and your performance, your response times are some of the fastest you've ever seen that you didn't even know was possible. The problem is our processes we have in place today that were designed 15 years ago can't do it.
Yeah, this really paints the picture of the cycle that folks are stuck in. So how do we get out of there?
You have to have automation, and now we need to stop right there. When I say automation, again, I'll go into shops around the world and say, let's talk about automation, and I always get, now stop, we're already automated. And then I can almost recite to them exactly what they're doing right now. They're generating JCL. They're running statistics. Hopefully they're using real-time statistics, but usually they're still generating statistics. Then they're running a program to generate jobs based on certain thresholds that maybe they've even written programs to do. And then that generates thousands of lines of JCL that they have to figure out now, when can I run it together? What can I run in parallel? When can I run it because it's probably going to cause availability problems? I got to schedule all these things. And then I run them on Saturdays. Then I come in on Sunday and figure out what went wrong if I didn't get called Saturday night. I have to rerun certain things or just postpone other things till next week, which means my performance is going to be bad for another week. But don't worry, John, I'm completely automated. Like, you spent your entire week on that process that you just thought was completely automated. When we say automation, we mean never generating JCL. We mean setting your policies of when things should be done, why they should be done, how they should be done, and running the same job every single day, running it 3 times a day, whatever that means. And as it's running in real time, determining you just gave me that wild-carded job that said reorg the entire payroll database. Well, maybe as I'm running, I find out there's only one index I need to do. I'm already doing it. It's done. You're good. You're optimized. Next time you run it, now there's several partitions that need to be done in certain indexes. But you never change your job. You never generated JCL. It's completely hands-free. You get into, okay, now how does that actually work? We give you the ability to give us those policies. You can set the schedule. When are things allowed to be done? When are things not allowed to be done? You can set the, what are my thresholds? You can set what are my exceptions? Are there certain things I don't want you to reorg? Are there certain things you should always reorg? Maybe it's based on the time of day, whatever those kind of things are. And then you just run your job. Run it every day. Run it twice a day, like I said. And then I usually get people saying, oh my gosh, the scary thing is here, I lose control. It's like, you don't have control now. What this is actually giving you control and letting you determine why I'm doing things and when I'm doing things, and really managing your system much easier, but you don't have to be involved every single second. I had one customer tell me that, well, this won't work because I don't want Carolyn reorganizing John's table space because we have a system in place where she's not allowed to do that. So I asked him how. And he goes, well, there's no way we actually enforce it. We just tell her not to do it. And so with wildcard, she might accidentally. Like, well, with our automation, you can actually set that as a policy and tell it, no, if she picks up John's table space, it tells her you're not allowed to do that and skips it. Or maybe it notifies John saying she accidentally did this, make sure, tell her to stop doing it. So we can actually put those in and give you control back.
So I imagine that this is sounding really appealing to folks at this point, but let's talk about a few more real-world examples of improvements that some of our customers have seen over and above that one, John.
Yeah, when we look at performance, there's different ways of measuring it. These are things directly from customers. We didn't solicit this. These are just them telling us. We had customers tell us, across the board, my applications improved by 10%. We've had individual response times increase by 90%, or response times decrease, I guess, by 90%. That's mainly based on the fact that we're actually reorganizing indexes. We're not rebuilding indexes. We're not dropping whatever. We're reorganizing indexes at this high speed. And so your queries are actually accessing the data the way they're supposed to. We've had customers call in, actually application teams call in and say, what did you do? We did nothing but finally reorganize indexes and got everything optimized the way it was supposed to be back to your baseline. The best thing I've ever seen is that this goes to cost, that we've had customers actually see their entire MIPS consumption reduced by up to 6%.
And that's a great segue, John. So, let's spend a few minutes showing how you really bring down your overall cost of DB2.
Okay, yeah, cost is very important. And so, if we look here, you'll see everyone show you big bar, little bar charts. I don't want you to focus, and this is fun. I love doing charts because, look, we're 70% faster. I've seen 90% faster. But that doesn't help you at all. I mean, if I tell you my reorg is 5% faster, you're like, well, usually the response I get is, that doesn't save us any money because I don't pay for my CPU time for reorg. It's out of my peak. You're absolutely right. What this does, though, the reason I'm showing this performance as we talk about cost savings is we showed you those peaks and valleys of getting your reorg done every week. Well, now if I can reorg something in 1/6 of the time or 1/5 of the time, I can reorganize it 5 times as often and not use any more CPU. I can get things done during the day. I can now get reorgs done every single day as opposed to the weekend, especially if I'm giving you the full availability at the same time. If I'm using less DASD, then I can get more done at the same time. So now all of a sudden you're transforming the way you can do utilities, when you can do utilities, and then that transfers to now I can actually optimize my system and bring down my cost.
Nice. So I have a fun customer example here. This one's a pretty big deal because of the 10% reduced cost that they were able to achieve that they provided to their business. This customer received one of the highest levels of recognition from his company, a President's Award. Who wouldn't like that kind of recognition? So they reduced costs by managing their database better than they were and using more modern tools instead of throwing money or hardware at the problem.
And their life got easier through automation. It was a win-win for everybody.
Nice. Okay, so bringing it all together, John, let's talk about, exciting example of this European customer who was able to achieve some great results across all of these areas that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, so far I've shown you some case studies of performance, getting big objects done, giving you availability, doing those kind of things. This is a customer that implemented the entire thing and then show how it transformed their world. So what again, no, we're completely automated. We don't have any of those issues you talked about, but let's start talking. And we went through it and they said, well, our biggest problem is we have a 2% increase in budgeting for MIPS every single year. We started looking at them. We also found out, well, you're not reorganizing most of your objects. And I said, well, it's because it's too big. We can't do it. We can manage about 10 to 30 terabytes each month. That's about what we can do. So what we did was we implemented NGT automation in March, and that's important because on the next couple slides I'm going to show you some charts that they gave us. But they started in March, fully implemented by, I believe, June of 2016. They're now reorganizing about 8 times as much data as they used to. It ends up being around 90 terabytes each month. And what they saw by doing all this, it's completely automated. We actually put in automation that focused on, let's make sure your indexes are always perfect. No matter what the table space is, let's always focus on those indexes first. And they saw major MIPS reduction. So let's look at how their process went. You see on the top there, they started in March, they reorganized about 8 times more data by June. So now their workload increases, and that's usually a fear I get is great. Now I've got those costs. But if you look at their CPU utilization, starting in March, they actually reduced it. This is why those benchmarks I showed you are so important. We can do more in less time with less CPU, so now we can actually reduce your CPU usage even doing more. But then more importantly, what does that do? You see at the beginning of the year, they were on track to increase their MIPS just like they were the last couple of years. Then in March, they started implementing NGT, and by June, they were done. And what they found was just by optimizing DB2, they reduced their MIPS by up to 6%, and they actually returned their cost basis down to 2014 levels. So without all the SQL tuning, without all those other things, all they did was just run better data management, and they were able to roll back 2 years off of their cost structure. That's why I get so excited talking about these things.
And we can see why. So, John, just really quickly, can you summarize what the high points are, what the advantages are of implementing more modern, innovative solutions like next generation technology for the group.
Yeah, so kind of summarize everything we just talked about. We can manage bigger and bigger objects. When you've got lobs, large objects or lobs, we'll actually validate those as part of the process. They're completely fast and efficient, which means that you're able to do different things that you were never able to do and eliminate all those workarounds. We're constantly doing the integrity checking as part of the processes for you. You can run things throughout the day because you've got zero downtime. You'll see performance improvements in your utilities, but more important in your Db2 system. They take advantage of the hardware you have on the floor so we can spread things out across the sysplex. We take major advantage of zip engines. For example, loads and unloads, we can use up to 90% of our CPU, offload it to a zip engine. It's designed with that in mind. So we're taking advantage of what you've already got on the floor and can actually transform the way you do data management, simplifying your world and making it much more ready for the digital business.
Thank you. Okay, so now I think we're ready to take some questions. Janine, if you could open up the lines, that would be great.
Great, Carolyn. Yes, we have some questions, so let's get started. First question, and it's funny because this question had actually been in the Q&A panel, John, but you just touched on it. Does the NGT utility use zip specialty engines?
Yeah, so that's a simple one. Absolutely. It's designed to do it. We have made the CPU zip eligible wherever possible. Now, this is actually one of those things that I've seen benchmarks where another vendor has said, look, we use more zip engines than BMC's NGT does. BMC used 10 seconds of zip CPU. We used 3 minutes of CPU. And I look at the whole thing and say, well, we used 20 seconds of CPU total. You used 6 minutes. So yeah, we may not use a higher number. We use a very high percentage, and we make it eligible wherever possible. We'll also report for you how much we moved over, how much was eligible. Maybe you didn't have the capacity to move it to zip, but we'll tell you what was eligible and what was actually used for reporting purposes for you.
Okay, next question. You said it, but do they believe it? Here's the question. How do you reorg without unloads, sorts, and loads?
Yeah, so the way to answer that is through ridiculous technical and patented information. I'd be happy to talk about that in person with people, but the idea is we looked at it at a high level. We looked at it differently. Everybody else does things the same way, and when they say that they're faster than someone else, what they did was, well, IBM does their sort this way. Maybe I can tweak the sort to get a little bit faster. When we designed all this, we stepped back and said, wait a minute, DB2 is not random data, it's disorganized. How do I get it organized without ever using a sort? And we came up with patented technology that allows us to do that efficiently without respect to how badly disorganized your data is. IBM has a method where they don't sort also, but the problem is if you're under 95% clustered, it takes forever. Well, we have patents in there that allow us to look at the data, determine the best way of getting it organized, and dynamically run that differently every time depending on what that data looks like. So we can give you incredible performance. And once you get rid of that sort, that's the key to everything. Now we've gotten rid of the decompress, the unload, the load, all those different phases. It's now just reorg.
Okay. Let's see if you can make this one out, John. I'm not sure if I'm reading it right, but what about the soft or sort work areas, whether DD
okay.
or, do you see that one there?
So,
Maybe
yeah,
you can restate it.
I do. So yeah, what about the sort work areas or DD names in the JCL? So this goes back to when I showed you the JCL. I showed you 6 lines of JCL that to any DBA out there is looking going, nope, there's no way. I know that my job is 100 lines long. How are you doing this in 6? Because you don't have the sort names. You don't have all the output file. What are you doing? Well, we don't need it. We don't sort. So therefore, we don't need all those sort work files. We don't ever need that stuff. Copy data sets. We'll dynamically allocate them based on your rules, so we don't need those in there. We have completely simplified the JCL, and then there's certain things like these sort ones that you just don't ever need again, so save yourself space. You'd be shocked at how many people have floors of DASD available for sorting just during reorgs. You can actually free that up and turn it into real storage.
Okay, we have a couple that kind of touch on this whole idea of no downtime. So here's the question. How does the NGT perform the reorg with no downtime without reading the DB2 logs? Can you please elaborate on how the data changes and DS switch is handled on a reorg with no downtime?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I mentioned that we don't touch the DB2 logs. The logs are the biggest bottleneck in your entire system. When you're doing batch processing, it's hammering those DB2 logs. And so let's say I'm reorganizing table space A, and you're doing processing on table space B. Those logs are filling up. And so I've got to read that DB2 log to find out that very little changed on my table space. But we don't do that. We stay away from the log completely. We are actually watching the VSAM data sets in real time of the objects we're doing. We can manage up to 15,000 table spaces or partitions all at the exact same time. And so we're monitoring the physical VSAM data sets, and so we know when DB2 changes pages. We know what changed during our reorg only, so we know what those things are. We know how to apply them. We actually know how fast your system's applying changes, so we can gauge that. We can then, even during our fast switch, we can leave the objects in read-write. We do have complete control, and there's a lot of controls we can put on there to where we can make sure that we do not impact any application. The worst case scenario is I can't get my reorg done because I can't get control of the object. And that's fine. You ran an online reorg. I shouldn't impact applications. So then the next obvious question is, well, IBM gives me this way of forcing, and you can just cancel all the threads. Well, I've heard a great analogy about that. It's like going to the doctor and them saying, well, you got an ingrown toenail, so we're going to have to cut off your leg. Yes, we can handle that where you want us to force the reorg to get done, but we don't do it with brute force like that. Again, let's go back to automation. Are there certain threads that we're not allowed to cancel? Are there certain threads we can cancel? Are there times of the day we can do it, times of the day we can't? Is it based off the user? What are your rules? Let's say that you were inside the utility and I told you, oh, I can't get this reorg done because this persistent thread is out there. What research would you do to go say, no, that's okay, get rid of that one? Well, then we can put that in the utility and do it dynamically so you don't have to get bothered and follow all of your rules. So all that stuff is capable, but it's a much more elegant, almost surgical approach to managing it the way you do.
Okay, folks, we're going to take one more quick question, but I do want to point out that Carolyn and John have been generous enough to provide their email address here. So if you have a question that we didn't get to, certainly we'll have a record of that one. But go ahead and feel free to contact them with your questions. So here's the final question for you, John. How hard is this to implement?
That's another great question. And by the way, I want to reiterate what Janine just said. My email is there. You've seen or you've heard, hopefully, how excited I get talking about this. Email me and I'll talk to you. I love talking about this stuff because I see what it does for customers. So how hard is it to implement? If I can show you how to simplify your life, and then I have to tell you, well, it's going to take you 2 years and you're going to have to hire more people and bring in more staff to do it, I haven't done a thing for you. Again, we designed this with digital business in mind, and one of those things is you don't have time to do something that's very hard to implement. I showed you the JCL for reorg. It's very easy to implement. In fact, most people, the hardest part they have about implementation is stop thinking about what I'm doing today. What do I want to be doing? Get rid of all those workarounds. What would I ideally do? Once we've got that, we can do it with you. There's different paths to NGT. We have some customers who have been using BMC for years and have the classic utility set up for 20 years. We have a path for them to very quickly move over. If you're coming from IBM, for example, a lot of the syntax was designed with IBM in mind to make it very easy to do. So the implementation is very, very manageable, and I want to say very, very easy because we designed it that way to make sure you can get this on the floor quickly. If you want to say, well, how should I implement? What I usually tell people is, look, you've got big problems. Yes, we can solve your whole world like we did in that case study, but you've got major pain points. Let's target those pain points and maybe get reorgs done that you've never gotten done before. Do you have long-running loads or unloads? Let's get those fixed. And then we can once you've got all that and you're kind of breathing better, now we can say, now let's plan and just implement and solve everything.
Great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I especially want to thank you for your terrific questions and your participation in today's webinar. Carolyn and John, thanks for sharing your expertise with us today. Later this week, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of today's webinar. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again, and have a great day.